Hello, my name is Ilva Tare. I'm a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. Welcome to Balkan's Debrief, an online interview series that covers recent developments in the region. Today, we will talk about the Pristina and Belgrade dialogue. Veton Surroi, one of the most influential public intellectuals in Kosovo, is my guest today. After three failed meetings between Kosovo's Prime Minister Albin Kurti and the Serbian President Vucic, the normalization dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia appears to be stalled, and it also appears that there is no way out anytime soon. What do you think of the present state of the dialogue, and what do you think Kurti could have done differently?
Well, it's not about Kurti, actually, or any other prime minister or president of Kosovo. It's actually about the dialogue itself, the way it was, um, the way it was prescribed initially. Uh, we haven't gotten to the point at which we are talking about the relationship between the state of Kosovo and the state of Serbia and normalizing these relations. And so it's not been stalled in the past three meetings. It's been stalled in the last 10 years without some progress um, that can be actually part of a normalization package.
Yes, but in a way, the dialogue was having some kind of products. There were some agreements signed, even in the Berlin process, but then it stopped because Kosovo is asking for reciprocity before continuing further. Is this a way to help the dialogue, or can it be different? Can Kurti and his administration have a different approach on it?
Well, the negotiation has to come to the point at which it becomes serious. And serious negotiations are about actually what is the state of relationship between Kosovo and Serbia as states, and how to normalize these relations between two states. As long as there are issues which are important, of course, but not of that importance, that emerge, such as license plates of cars or other issues, then they can attract attention. They attract a lot of energy, but they do not actually change the situation in the terms at which they should have initially. Unfortunately, the negotiating process has gone into a micromanagement, not now, but for years. And so the real challenge is how do we emerge into a serious, advanced negotiating process at which both parties actually deal with their grievances.
But how would you call it? How would you describe it? What is the current relationship between Kosovo and Serbia?
It is an unfinished conflict, and we need to get to a point at which uh, both states agree that they need to devise a better future, one of cooperation, one in which they find not only peace but an advanced form of integration within the European family. And this is our joint endeavor. So, how do we get into a point at which our mutual relations are those of nations within the European family?
Yeah, exactly. What is the way forward, according to you?
The way forward is we need to understand. We need to get to a point of understanding in which we will share the same relationship as European states do. And so, once we envisage this as a space of freedom for European freedoms, then we engage into a process in which we not only finish the conflict, but we begin on a process of mutual relationship that is much more advanced in the way in which our economies communicate, our people communicate, our states communicate, our cultures communicate. And because this is a shared space, we understand how these cycles, if you will, of shared spaces go forward. So we start at the level of our countries, then we get to the region, then we get into Europe, actually.
Veton, I asked you earlier what could have Kurti done anything differently, but let me ask you again, what could have Kosovo done differently in the approach towards the dialogue with Serbia?
It's not only Kurti or Kosovo. It's all of the parties involved, and all of the parties involved have to get to a point at which they engage into a serious process of negotiation. We say, okay, if in the next 12 months we get to a point at which we engage into a serious negotiating process, what is it that Serbia needs to feel at ease in its relationship with an independent Kosovo?
Mhm.
What is it needs in terms of protecting its cultural heritage? What is it needs in terms of protecting the people in the sense in the OSCE responsibility between kin state and the people, the Serbian people? What is it needs to advance further in terms of security cooperation with Kosovo?
You have mentioned twice it needs to be a serious process, a serious dialogue. Who isn't serious in this process?
Well, the process itself is not serious because it has not engaged the parties in a way in which we need to get to a point in which we say, okay, these are two independent European states. They need to get to a situation in which they see what is it in the interest of their relations that they need to deal with. Uh, it's been license plates for 10 years now, and you cannot deal with license plates. Imagine if France and Germany had dealt with license plates problems from 1945 until 1967. That's 22 years after the war, 23 to 68. We are now in 23 years after the war, and we're still dealing with license plates.
And it seems that the lack of progress so far is unwelcomed by partners, both EU and the US. Is there a risk for Kosovo here? Do you envision any cost that Kosovo may be exposing herself by not progressing into this dialogue process?
Well, maybe the issue is that we need to. The dialogue as it is insufficient, and so we need to turn the volume on, if you will, on the dialogue. We need to have a more enhanced process of negotiations, and I think it's not about changing partners or mediators. It's about changing the rhythm and putting a more serious context of negotiations.
Prime Minister Kurti remarked in an interview for Atlantic Councils with Damir Marusic a few days before that Vucic has been daydreaming about land swapping with his predecessors, and that the new government of Kosovo has transformed the way the dialogue was conducted. Has he really transformed it?
Well, I wouldn't comment on that. I think we have to go back to the basics, and the basics are this: Kosovo and Serbia, with the leaderships that they have, and not expecting that somehow out of the blue something better, but with what we have today, need to find an agreement, and they need to do it within a new environment. And the new environment in Europe is, of course, the war that Russia is conducting on Ukraine and has endangered the European architecture of stability, of peace. And within this new challenge, both Kosovo and Serbia need to step up the plate and actually engage in securing the region and integrating this region into a European space of security and cooperation.
You mentioned it right that the war in Ukraine and Russian invasion of Ukraine has created a new momentum for the European enlargement in the region. Is there any leverage that Kurti can use here?
Well, there's a discrepancy between the description and the prescription. There's a discrepancy between our analysis, not, and when I mean our, the European or the Western analysis, that we are now in a very important historical moment, uh, which is similar to the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the prescriptions, which is continue with what you're doing right now. Um, we need to find a prescription that is closer to the description, which is if we are at a pivotal moment in history of Europe, then we need to find pivotal solutions for some crises, unfinished conflicts in the Western Balkans, in Europe. And this can be done relatively now and relatively soon. And when you compare the crises of Bosnia and Herzegovina or Kosovo and Serbia and these unfinished conflicts, they are diminutive. They are very small compared to the crisis that we have between Ukraine and Russia, or Russia with the rest of Europe.
We'll talk about another form of cooperation, the Berlin process. What should Kosovo hope from the relaunched Berlin 2.0? What can Pristina do to make the most out of this situation?
I think both Pristina and all the parties, all the 6 countries of the Western Balkans, need to actually engage in an enhanced way in the Berlin process 2.0. We need to get to the objectives which are already prescribed in the Sofia communique, in the Sofia agreement, to have a common regional market. Our objective is now how to actually get the objective, which is the common regional market for the Western Balkan 6, into an operation plan that gets to it in a relatively short period of time. I don't think we should engage in more talks about how we need to have cooperation. That's already motherhood and apple pie, if you will. We need to get to a point in which we say, okay, we have an objective, that's an agreed objective, which is the common regional market. And if it is the case, then what are the 10 things that we need to do within the next 6 months in order to enhance that process, that direction, and get to palpable, measurable results?
So you are talking about an approach from Kosovo that doesn't go with the same attitude as before, that says first the recognition, full recognition from Serbia, and then we can talk about agreements and respecting that.
I think the idea of a common regional market implies that parties will be equal within that process, and the test will be simple and simple, measurable things. You cannot have a regional market, common regional market, if you don't have the freedom of movement of people. And so, one of the easiest tests would be to say, okay, let's see
Let's do it.
that
Yeah.
if within the next 6 months, all citizens of the Western Balkan 6 can actually travel with their ID biometric cards, and this is easy. This is something that can be done. It's a technical issue. It's not a political issue. It's people who have biometric ID cards have measurable capacity of movement.
What do you make of Lavrov's recent public statement supporting Open Balkan Initiative?
Well, there might be politics involved. There might be other issues. Russia has not actually been supportive of Balkan cooperation, Western Balkan cooperation, or Western Balkan as a zone for European freedoms. It has insisted throughout the past 10 years in clandestine and semi-clandestine and not very clandestine operations to actually not allow for the Western Balkan countries to cooperate between each other. Montenegro has been destabilized by Russian action. There was an attempt in North Macedonia to do so. There's a continuous pressure on Serbia to be the point of pressure on not allowing the European or the Western, if you will, a notion of freedom to involve the whole region. So I would not put too much importance on Mr. Lavrov supporting one or the other issue.
Should Kosovo join the Open Balkan Initiative? So far is not part of it,
I
claiming
think
Prime Minister Kurti says that we are part of Berlin process, but Berlin process so far hasn't delivered much.
Well, I think the issue is this. I think we should be participating as full members or watching or expressing our opinions on any regional initiative that there is in here in the Western Balkans and any initiative that there is in Europe. I think we should be active participants voicing our
Including Open Balkans.
opinion, including any initiative that there will be. So our aim ought to be to participate in any multilateral process in Europe, outside of Europe, in the world, in which we actively should pronounce our opinion.
You have been quite close with Prime Minister Kurti. Have you told him your view on these initiatives?
I am formally a consultant to the government, so
You
I
still
have a
are.
contract. Yes, I have a contractual relationship with the government, which allows me to express my opinion.
Because you just said that it would be good that Kosovo participates, but Kosovo is not participating.
I always express my opinion, and as a consultant, it is my duty to do so.
So you have said it to Prime Minister. And I asked you about the costs, if Kosovo is risking anything by being out of these initiatives and not getting involved in a process that EU somehow, but even a US deputy under Secretary Escobar supported it again in the last meeting of Open Balkans in Ohrid. And also he said this should be an economical tool for the Western Balkans.
Well, I think all in all, I think our main focus ought to be on the common regional market, which is an objective that is measurable within EU parameters. And I think any initiative, political, economic, that supports a common regional market should have our voice in it.
Visa liberalization, long overdue decision. What can Kosovo do to get it?
I think Kosovo has done already so much. The question is, of course, is a political decision that EU member states need to address. I think they have not really done their part of the deal. And I think it just doesn't make sense. And especially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it doesn't make sense that countries such as Ukraine, citizens of countries such as Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, have the capacity of free travel in the European Union, and Kosovo, which is quite closer to the heart, if you will, of the continent, has not the capacity to do so. With also a different European perspective than that part of the region.
I've asked you during this conversation several times, what can Kosovo do and the administration do? What can Serbia do to have some progress on the dialogue process?
Well, Serbia needs to address the crux of the issue. And the crux of the issue is not how to escape from reality. The reality is that Kosovo is an independent state, and the reality is that that status will not change. It's not that the Kosovars will suddenly decide that they want to somehow not become independent. There's a historical movement which has produced this situation. And so we need to get to an agreement between two states about how the future will be, but how to integrate the Serbian national interest in the relationship between Kosovo and Serbia, and vice versa. How do we as Kosovo integrate our national interest in the relationship between us and Serbia? Kosovo needs to have normal relations with all its neighbors, and it sees an added value in having the same relationship as it does now with all the other neighbors. So there's no reason why Kosovo should not have a better the relationship that it has with Montenegro or with Macedonia.
A last question, Veton. Are you optimistic that the dialogue somehow will change trajectory and will start having results?
I think we are at a historical pivotal moment at which all countries, nations in Europe, and not only in Europe but in the world, assume new responsibilities. And assuming new responsibilities means getting to a point at which we engage both parties, both nations, and the continent itself in actually resolving issues that are not so difficult to resolve. The question of Kosovo and Serbia is not difficult to resolve. The relationship between Ukraine and Russia is difficult to resolve now. That's the most difficult question because we have an invasion from a country and a dispute of actually the identity of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people as such, and that is much more difficult than the nature of relationship that we have between Kosovo and Serbia.
Veton, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us in Balkans Debrief. Thank you also for joining us and on Twitter at AC Europe. And please join our conversation by using hashtag Balkans Debrief.